It's time for our final speaker. Brilliant fact about our next speaker. They coined the term micromobility. How fantastic is that? Describing, of course, shared vehicles weighing less than 500 kilograms. Today, I think they're going to talk a bit about the opportunities that micromobility presents in the energy transition and also the journey towards zero carbon transport. So I guess what we're all wondering is, where's the pressure? Where's the real drive going to come for this? And I have a theory that Horace Dediu, our final speaker, will argue that it might not come from the power players in government. Maybe it's going to come from percolating up from the grassroots. But let me not steal their thunder. I'll be listening intently. It's the second time we're honoured to welcome him back to our screens. Horace Dediu, welcome to our EnergyTech event. It's so good to be joined by you again.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much for having me. Can you hear me okay?
Loud and clear. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm in the East Coast of the United States, and you know we're having very cold weather, but it's been an optimistic look at the next year here from sort of micromobility world, and we're super excited to share with you guys today.
100%. Well, we're all ears. And just on a personal note, from Brits to Americans, we can't wait to get the British-American relationship firing on all cylinders again. We've missed being in each other's countries. So thank you for rejoining us. And we're in your very capable hands, Horace Dediu.
Well, thanks again. And, you know, this is a kind of a deep dive into micromobility. I'm going to make it very quick. But the whole point here is to give you a perspective on how to think about these opportunities in general. It's the whole question of like, how do you disrupt? How do you enter a new, how do you create a new market? How do you act as an entrant against incumbents and so on? I think micromobility encapsulates a lot of that. It was introduced as this idea of sort of very lightweight vehicles, sometimes shared, sometimes owned, actually. We're not exclusive to sharing only, but this idea of the small, the meek, the modest, the humble, being much more interesting as an opportunity versus what we think of as, you know, the establishment. A lot of talk about electric cars, a lot of talk about EVs, infrastructures for EVs, and so on. But let's think a little bit about something that is suitable for short distances, very adequate for, you know, 1 or 2 passengers. It's very, very comfortable for short trips. And it's not just bikes and scooters. We're seeing a huge explosion of form factors. We're seeing innovation coming from taking parts off the shelf, communication parts, motor and electric drive, plus battery technology, bringing them to a small form factor, making them available for jobs to be done that are sort of pervasive in urban environments. And so we're seeing an explosion in form factors, similar to what we saw with the smartphone actually in its early years, and with the personal computer in its early years. And it's all about the low end of the market. Now, what is the market? Is it, you know, speed, power, performance in transportation? Is it range, as we're led to believe by automakers? No, it's actually distances to travel. This is the job to be done, A to B in time C. Turns out that there's a lot more short trips out there than long trips, and the short trips are the ones that are overserved by the incumbents, by the automakers with 400-kilometer range cars, with 3,000-kilogram vehicles. So you know the familiar, you know, solutions we have, the bikes and the scooters. But as I said, there's a plethora of opportunity in looking at different form factors, and all of that is made possible by enabling technologies that have been developed over decades. Again, as an entrepreneur, as a founder, you should be thinking, I don't want to do a moonshot. I want to pick up off-the-shelf pieces, putting together in a new and novel way. And that's exactly what's happening here. And in fact, what happened with the PC industry early on, it wasn't really about developing entirely new processor architectures. It was more about assembly. And what's driving it, as I said, short distances, but there's also the fact that urbanization, you know, this is all public data. This has all been building for decades. Just things are ramping up in terms of number of people living in cities. Again, the predominance of short distances, the economic opportunity that small trips provide in terms of utility, but in terms of joy and pleasure as well, and the emission mandates. And this is more of a force that's acting on the whole industry. So emissions and the need to deal with carbon have been an increasing part of the discussion. It wasn't the case 3 years ago when this whole space began, but now we're starting to see that this actually does do a great job there. Now, starting at the low end, why should you look at the low end? Well, again, as I said, there's a lot more opportunity there that's invisible. It's not something we measure correctly. We look at performance in the wrong way. We also should be thinking about, how to bring that service to people, as sharing does. And car sharing, although it's possible to, imagine a future there, we're seeing how long it's taking. You can wait and see, and you can see the patterns over more than a decade of what's happened there. And at the same time, you see the rise of shared vehicles that are small as being so much faster. Now, one other thing I want to throw out there is, like, how do you think about where to play in this space? I mean, or whatever space you might be in. Well, again, I'm borrowing heavily from the history here. Phone business and the PC business, they developed what are called stacks. This is a way to think about where you are in the hierarchy of technology solutions. And although we think about the vehicles, maybe with the sharing as the service network, but there's all these other things. There's potential platforms, there's apps, there's data, there's insurance, there's platforms potentially, there's safety considerations, there's accessories, all these other things. Well, let's put them in the stack. And if you do that, everywhere from components at the very bottom, just like you might think of microprocessors, devices, operators above that, right? The phone business, platforms, iOS and Android, and then applications, the app stores, and everything else. This is how that stack built. Now, if you look at micromobility, it's very similar scenario shaping up: components, devices, operators, platforms, which are still to be determined, but they will come, and finally applications and services on top. Again, the idea here is to segment, identify opportunity, look at the value chain, and stack things up. And if you did that, you would be looking at, already hundreds of companies that are putting themselves in these clusters. We at Micromobility Industries actually have a collection of all of the members of the community, and we are able to look through their interests and identify these clusters. And so 700 different companies. And here I'm just going to pop up a lot of the icons here, or logos, but you can see just how many players there are in these categories. Everything from retail, operators, etc. I'm not going to go through all of them. There's over 700. The next thing I want to throw out there is this idea that things don't all happen at once. There's a sequence to the adoption of this technology. You have low end, early, or you have early adopters, then you have middle and late. As you know, this is called the diffusion curve, or the adoption of technology, the story of adoption and diffusion. And what's interesting is when you look at that and you should ask yourself, am I early? Am I late? When should I act? If you're big, if you're small, you should think about mapping the S curve for this particular opportunity. By the way, another thing, and I know it was mentioned early on, is like, what is the role of government? Where does the mandate come from? Is this going to be a top-down or a bottom-up approach? As you can see already, and I hope this is coming through implicitly, this is a bottom-up approach. It's not going to come from mandates from above. There will be cities that will be proactive. There will be cities that are progressive in governments, etc. But most of it is a reaction to an invention that someone else came up with, probably in the private sector. And what we're seeing is exactly this phenomenon. And the resistance, in fact, is from the incumbents. The resistance is along the lines, well, the world is the way it is. We can't change it. Infrastructures are very expensive to change. But bear in mind that infrastructures are sunk costs, in the sense that if you build the world according to an obsolete form factor, an obsolete technology, an obsolete emissions model, it's time to get rid of it. And you're much better off building something new than trying to preserve the old. And this is common sense, but it's hiding within the jargon of the industry, which says that you need to somehow, preserve. We've always done it this way. There's so many billions of dollars in infrastructure. We can't just erase that, or we can't get rid of it. Of course you can. How did it get there in the first place? What was there before it? So a lot of that has to be thought of in terms of like how to have a conversation with the the powers that be. again, it's happened over and over again. And you look at the auto industry, you look at transportation in general, you look at trucking, and you look at shipping, you look at naval aviation, all of these infrastructures, all of these stories have played out in similar ways. An invention, usually on the device side, would cause a reevaluation of what's efficient, and then a rebuilding of infrastructures. And we've gone this over and over again. The UK is actually a leader in many of these cases historically, the canals, the rail systems, and in Navy or shipping in general. So I don't want to belabor the point, but there are S-curves in terms of adoption times. You need to plan and act accordingly. So in my, there are some things which are fast and some things which are slow. And I'm just going to, I'm not going to go through the, all the dozens of examples. There's over 140 actual diffusion curves I've studied, but I'm going to try to plot the micromobility diffusion curve and where we are along that line. And I think that arrow that you see here represents where we are right now. It still mostly needs to be built. We're looking at a 10 to 15 year time cycle right now. And that has to coincide with this opposite diffusion curve, which is the carbon curve. This is where we need to be in a certain time frame. And you have to ask, is the solution adequate in this time frame? What about the alternatives? What about electric mobility? What about other energy systems? It's all happening right now as we speak. And COVID has only accelerated things. I think that's about all the time I have, but happy to have a conversation. Anybody wants to hit me up on Twitter at Asymco. Let's get this going.
Horace, as ever, that was first class. Can you hear me, Horace, by the way?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, thank you. I've got just a couple of super quick questions for you. Thank you. Horace, if you and I had access to a TARDIS and we could go to any corner of the globe and you wanted to take us somewhere now and go, look on the ground here, this is a clue about the future of micromobility, where would you take us?
Okay, I'm a big believer in bottom-up solutions, actually starting in places that are actually, let's say, the least developed, who have the least competition from incumbents. So one place I'd go is India. It's not so much there's a lot of electric mobility there, but there's a lot of micromobility in the form of two-wheelers, the largest two-wheeler market in the world. It's very low price for transport, or low willingness to pay for transportation. You could also look at China, but China is actually getting too much development in automobility. But if you look at India and ask yourself, what would happen if all these small vehicles were to turn electric, 2 and 3 wheels? It's unbelievable, the opportunity. Mobilizing 1 billion people very quickly with electric mobility, that would be the place to go. Possibly also Africa.
Yeah, interesting. So you clearly believe in the next generation of startups. Just to look up to this house, knowing what you know, you're one of the world's leading analysts of some of the major tech companies. Any you know full well is eyeing up this space and wants to be associated in our mind with micromobility?
Sorry, you broke up a bit. Which names would be associated with it?
Yeah, or it's on their roadmap that we should watch this space because they're coming for it.
Okay, so mostly it's startups. There's very few incumbents that are actually, even tech incumbents. I'd be looking at the big 5 like Google, Apple, Amazon, etc. Now you might ask, what do they have to do with it? What about Maps? Maps is like the browser of micromobility. If Google were to get onto this space, it wouldn't be by shipping a vehicle. What they would do is they'd say, hey, if you're an operator providing a service, participate in an auction to get surfaced as one of the ways to travel A to B. So if somebody types in the destination and their maps, you should be participating in an auction to bid on that trip being assigned to you. And that type of mobility search is going to be very interesting. If you look at Amazon, same thing. How would they change their infrastructure, especially in urban areas, to take advantage of these electric vehicles? They're doing vans and trucks now, but they could very well do bikes and quads, which are smaller and more efficient. Apple could be in the device business, but it also could be in the helmet business. It could be in the wearable business. All of these things that would enhance the experience wouldn't necessarily have to be at the device side. That's why when you look up the S curve, it's like they're probably going to come in like towards the middle to the end of the adoption curve with these parts of the stack that are above the device. Possibly they could get into the device business, but that's, I think, less likely.
Yeah, fascinating predictions. Thank you, Horace. Just time for just one very brief question from the audience. Do you see any difficulties with acceptance of new technologies by an aging population, especially with increase in lower age dementia? It's a serious challenge with aging populations.
Absolutely, but you know, one of the things that's been pointed out to me is that if you look at Germany, the e-bike is actually have early adopters among the elderly, and this is because they kind of, you know, aren't looking for making the same kind of trips that you know, when you're working, you'd see those types of longer distances. So it's more for leisure, and if you think about that, you know, there's ways to make it easy for the elderly, easy for the disabled to actually participate. A lot of that has to do with infrastructure. Unfortunately, we have to play that chicken and egg game. But it's not exclusive to the young and exclusive to the highly, you know, athletic. It might be seen that way in the UK, but if you look around again, you'll see differences in Finland, which is also where I maintain a residence. In the northern parts of Finland, it's extremely common for children to ride, even in the winter, to school on their bikes.
Yeah, amazing. So much food for thought there. Horace, we're so grateful to you for your time. Thank you for rejoining us, and let's please keep in touch. Horace Dediu, thank you so much. It brings us to the end there with a sort of global perspective and a glimpse into the future. I just wanted to give you a very brief couple of tips, if you like, at the end of this session. Firstly, if you're not already part of our EnergyTech community, then please stand by for more information about how to get more fully signed up. They'll have an email out to you in the next few days. That's the first thing. The second thing is this whole recording will be available. We'll send round the link for you. Of course, you can watch it again if you'd like to, but also if there's anyone you think should watch all or some of it, please do pass it on or share on social channels. That would be much appreciated. Finally, some of you have expressed an interest in the networking aspect of the program, particularly thanks to our partners at Codebase, and we're going to be in touch about that in the next few days as well. So all that remains is for me to say a big thank you. So much work behind the scenes from Barclays Eagle Labs, from Codebase, and from our partners at Opportunity Northeast. Thank you to them. I get the easy bit, really, presenting to you today, but I've hugely enjoyed it. Secondly, thank you to each and every one of our brilliant speakers for being pithy and concise and inspiring without exception. Really grateful to them. And finally, thank you to you. You're busy. You've got lots of demands on your time and attention. Thank you for tuning in to at least some, if not all, of today. I really appreciate it. So from everyone on the EnergyTech team, thank you for tuning in. Please do spread the word if you've enjoyed any or all of today. And until next time, from me, Ollie Barrett, it's goodbye.